Thank you for listening again to the Trainer podcast. As usual, I have to do a little warming up in English. And the more this conversation goes, my English goes better. This is our second conversation with Ken Murray. And if you have lived under a rock, I will show you. This is a legendary book, isn't it? Training at the Speed of Life. You don't have to say it, Ken, but it is. And you wrote it in
Oh, I finished. It went to print in 2004.
2004, yes, and it has, yeah, it's a classic. What are other classics, by the way? I think
Oh,
Dave Grossman on
yeah, Dave
Combat,
Grossman's On Killing.
on
That
Killing,
was
yeah.
actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize.
Ah,
And Dave was working at the Rat Lab at the time at West Point and wasn't even playing around in the law enforcement space. I found the book looking for a book called On Roasting by Barbara Kafka that she taught you how to roast
oh,
meats, fowl, at everything at 500 degrees. And had a cooking event coming up for Thanksgiving, and I wanted to roast a turkey properly. And so as I went looking for On Roasting, I saw On Killing. I'm going, well, that's interesting. And great, great book. And
yeah.
I introduced it to my friends at ILFE, Frank
Hmm.
Repass, and around Orlando PD. They started reading it, and were able to invite Dave out to start lecturing at ILFE, and things just really took off from there. I didn't actually get a chance to meet him for about a year. I'd been invited to the PPCT conference. Bruce Siddle had asked me to come,
Yeah,
and Dave was there, and I was all goofy. I'm going, "Oh, Colonel Grossman, I've got my book. Could you sign my book?" And I guess I'd been teaching portions from his book, always with attribution
yeah,
and just saying, here's a book that you absolutely need to read. It's the definitive piece on the psychological aspects of learning how to kill, which I was aware of, but I hadn't truly studied. And that was a scholarly work on the subject and a historical piece. And
yeah.
so he and I just became fast friends and are friends to this day. And he actually got the opportunity to sample in his own kitchen the 500-degree turkey when invited me for Thanksgiving one day, and I smoked out the house with a 500-degree turkey. And so it's
Wow,
yeah,
great.
it full circle. But just that is an absolute must
Yeah,
read. Um, on Combat is good. It's more of a compilation of a lot of essays
yeah,
that Dave had written, and it sort of got cobbled together by Lauren Christensen. Again,
yeah.
a very good author in his own right.
Lauren Christensen, eh? Yes, yeah,
He also wrote with Alexis Artwall
yeah,
and helped her for in emotional survival for law enforcement. Again, that is an absolute must read. And Alexis had a revised version of that come out a few years ago, which is almost double the size. And
ah,
so, again, just an amazing scholarly piece. Um, so I mean, there's a number of things out there. Make It Stick from the
yeah,
psychological
yeah, yeah,
sciences. There's so much out there
yeah,
in the space that we can play with. But there's a number of those just I would say anchor books
yeah,
that
yeah. And yours is definitely one of. I still have. I still can look into your book and find some inspiring quotes and so on. And just to set the context, in our conversation before, we talked about how do we call it? Your journey in reality-based training, your vision, your view of learning, and so on. So if people are interested in that, they can look to that conversation.
yes.
The bird of simulation. We even talked about hypnosis, NLP, and whatever not. And but today, when you talked about on killing,
Mm.
that's a part maybe we can start with because um, I'm intrigued by this concept of the peaceful warrior, and
Yeah.
and what it means is for me now. After growing up in a violent world and then doing martial arts and now being on how do you call it on a continent with like Ukraine and the war, and here in the Netherlands,
Mm.
there is a lot of talk about the war and resilience and so on. But and the question arises also in law enforcement, how how what is your idea of balancing the wish for peace, doing good things, but also, if necessary, to use violence? Or is it a too broad question? I don't know, but
Well, I don't think it's too broad a question, and I believe that one is necessary to the other, or all you end up with is barbarianism,
yeah,
right? If all you want to do is go out and conquer, then you'll often see in any of the science fiction movies, like Game of Thrones, you've got Daenerys Targaryen going out with the horsemen, and all they are is just hordes of barbarians. Interesting piece to that, though, even they have the sense of family and the sense of duty and the sense of honor. But if you don't have the capacity for peace, then you just fall into barbarianism, and that's where I believe civilization really uh, thrives or dies. Is if we don't have the peaceful aspect to it, if we
yeah,
don't have honor built into it. No better example of that than with the samurai. You know,
yeah,
they were very, very warlike, but they were also they would rather go and arrange flowers
yeah,
than cut heads off, but they were quite apt and able to do both. But I remember the old samurai parable of the samurai going out to kill one of his opponents, and he his opponent spat in his face, and he had to sheath his sword and walk away from it because he couldn't kill him out of anger.
yeah.
He had to kill him out of honor and duty. And so there was this interesting balance in that. And we see the yin and the yang, there's always the dark and the light and the shadow. So I think in any civilized place, one has to balance the other. But what we often find is with a pacification of some societies, they put people ostensibly who are they don't like the word warrior.
Yeah.
They worked well. Finally, we're getting warrior back because warriors don't start wars. Warriors fight the wars that have been started by others. You know, you got the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. I'd rather be a Menshevik and deal with people on an intellectual level than to have to go smash them with a club. But if we're going to have order and regulation within a society, then sometimes that order and regulation has to be meted out with some measure of violence, especially with those who would seek to disrupt that order. And so we're sending in many ways people who are absolutely ill prepared. Jordan Peterson talks about that. Said people who have no capacity for violence aren't peaceful; they're harmless, and that's not a good thing to be in a society where violence happens.
But
And we
what does that mean for training? Because training at the speed of life and doing reality-based training, but what does that mean for training? How how should we develop first responders with regard to this?
well, I think the first thing comes down to selection. We have to select people who have a capacity for violence, but who are not on the side of barbarianism.
Mm.
Heraclitus said it, right? That out of every 100 people in combat, 10 shouldn't be there, 80 are just targets, 9 are good fighters, and we're lucky to have them, but they the battle make up. But the one's a warrior. We got to find that one because he's going to bring all of the others home. And I think the ratios still hold true in modern societies today. And you take an average law enforcement organization or military organization, and 10% shouldn't even be there. When
Mm.
we look at what's going on in the Ukraine right now, by way of example, you got people that are being forced into vehicles and dragged up to the front lines because they need soldiers. Those are the people that just shouldn't even be there, and they're just kind of being used as meat for the grinder, if you would, in a wartime situation. We did it in America too. People were they called it being shanghaied. You get knocked on the head and stuck in a bag, and the next thing you know, you're on a warship heading somewhere. So there have always been people that have either been conscripted or forced into battle. But when we look at the ratios of Heraclitus, they are easily among the 10 that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And so what's the purpose of them being there? They're certainly not adding to the fray. And if they're not going to add to the affray, then all they are is bullet sponges. They're a human shield, uh, protecting those who are in the fight, and we can argue the ethics and morality of all of that, but numerically, that's there. The 80 that are just the targets, those are the ones that we have to spend the most time on because I believe that they are the most malleable. The nines and the ones, you could take the nines and the ones, you could toss them a DVD and some kit, and 8 weeks later, they've kind of figured out what they need to do. Um, it's the 80s. What are we going to do with the 80s? And
Yeah.
Dan Fraser, oh, I think you may have interviewed.
Yeah.
He's got a great book out called Kick-Ass Presentations. If you're creating any of the online presentations or PowerPoint presentations, got a really good book on that.
Yeah.
And he helped to revise a lot of the slides on mine. And when I talk about this piece, he's got the graph of the 10, the 80, the 9, and the 1. And then overlaid that, he's got Rick Astley, a disco song, talking about saving the 80s, right? Because all of that music came back there. But it makes a nice little poignant concept that it's the 80s that we really need to spend the amount of time on, and it needs to be an individual journey. So how do we school them to savagery? Patton talked about this. I think in the Patton papers, there was this one spectacular speech, and I may butcher it, but we'll see. He said that successful soldier must be educated to say charge. I say educated, for the man is not born who can say it out of hand. Civilization has tempered us. Many a man will risk his life with an easy mind in a burning house who recoils from having his face punched. We've been taught to look upon anger as low, so that many of us have never felt the God-sent ecstasy of unbridled wrath. We've never had our temples throb, have our eyes screw up, or have the red mist gather in our sight, yet we expect that a man should in an instant, the twinkling of an eye, divest himself of all restraint, of all caution, and hurl himself upon the enemy, a frenzied beast, lusting to probe his foeman's guts with 3 feet of steel or shatter his brains with a bullet, and it cannot be done, not without mental and physical practice. Therefore, we must school ourselves to savagery. We must picture the wild exaltation of the mounted charge. We have to feel what it feels like when our sword hilt crashes into the breastbone of our enemy. And only once we have schooled ourselves to savagery can we keep our 20th century clarity of vision and be able to, in a calculated way, decide whether to charge or fight on foot. And that transforms you temporarily into that frenzied beast. And I think Patton had it right, the ability to school ourselves to savagery. But where are we going to get that? You go out and get into a shooting. Even in North America, we shoot a lot of people. But even in North America, if you get into a shooting, it's a big, hairy deal. So there's going to be some legal consequences. There might be some physical consequences. There can be some emotional consequences, some social consequences. And you'll get to the other side of that. And if it was the justifiable or justified thing to do, then you will be found that you're excused from prosecution for that killing in society, because we've always got the way for the warrior. But if it becomes at all contentious, then there's all sorts of other issues that happen with that, and we'll talk more about that as the day goes on. But then you get into the second one. Statistically unlikely. Getting into 1 is statistically unlikely. Getting into 2, even more so. And, your psychology is just starting to get a better understanding of this. The likelihood of getting into 3 is very, very small. And yet, if you look at Mike Spick's book called The Ace Factor,
Yeah.
and he looks at that curve of your first 3 to 5 decisive combat engagements, meaning the ones that you won. Once you get your survival 5, then the 5 to 10, by the time you get to 10, you're almost undefeatable. In fact, the Air Force, once you get to that number 5, they give you a cool name. They call you Ace.
Mm.
You get five decisive confirmed combat kills. They give you a cool name, right? And so you can't do that in a civil society. You can't be painting the people that you've shot on the side of the side of your police car, or putting notches on the handle of your pistol. And I don't think we should. I think that would be somewhat morally reprehensible. However, when we just look at it from the pure psychological aspects of that, how do we school ourselves to savagery? Put people in harm's way for the benefits of society, and then bring them back emotionally and physically whole.
Mm.
So that there's a much larger equation to that, and
Yeah,
Dave Wilson's book really began to analyze that the psychological cost of learning how to kill in society and combat.
yeah, yeah. That's a great point. And how did that develop? How do we do our job with bringing them back home?
Oh, you mean how well are we doing?
Yeah.
Badly, badly. There's an epidemic of emotional breakdown in law enforcement, military. In American parlance, they were looking at something called Mission 22, which is a nonprofit organization looking at the fact that 22 veterans a day are taking their own lives. And those are the ones that kill themselves. How many are just living a horrible life and haven't done the ultimate act of taking their own lives? And so there has been this upswing in the Save a Warrior programs, the Air Force Bestow program, Beyond Safety Towards Wellness, a lot of the interventions that come from the likes of neurolinguistic programming and eye movement desensitization retraining, which is actually a modality of NLP.
Mm.
Francine Shapiro, that started EMDR, studied under, well, she actually worked for John Grinder, one of the
Mm.
founders of NLP back in the early days. And so that sort of came out of that, the whole eye movement
Yeah.
piece of that, the transcranial magnetic stimulation, the dual sympathetic reset with the excellent book by Dr. Eugene Lipov called The Invisible Machine.
What is the book
How
about?
The Invisible Machine, it's a book about how we don't need to go to war in order to get post-traumatic stress. And he's been working with a number of doctors to try to have it changed from PTSD, which is a disorder, to PTSI, which is an injury, because they've been able to prove that there's an injured part to your brain, which is reparable. And when we do that, the dual sympathetic reset, which is the anesthetization of the stellate ganglion between C3 and C6 on one or both sides, has had just this remarkable unwinding effect for a lot of the effects of past trauma.
Mm.
What happens is this re-engagement of the emotional pathways that lead to this overreaction to a triggering event that we call post-traumatic stress. When the triggering event happens, we just get this flood, and it actually adds neurochemistry and creates almost like myelinizing the brain fibers. It creates this thicker bundle that makes it much more prevalent when we get this triggering event. And what the dual sympathetic reset does is it unwinds a lot of that. It doesn't change your edge. It doesn't change the fact that the thing that happened, and you still need to work on how you got it to mean that. For instance, one of the things that I say, and some of your listeners will get a fishy eye when I say it, but post-traumatic stress, absent a traumatic brain injury at the initiating event, is a construct, not a
Mm.
pathology. What I mean by that is you can have 10 people in the room experiencing the exact same thing. Some people end up suffering from post-traumatic stress, and some people just think it's cool, right? What are the differences in that? There are some biological differences in the size and shape of your amygdala, but there are also the perceptual differences where we experience something, we start to give meaning to it, we start to emote, we have emotions around the
Yeah.
meaning that we give it, and then we create these neural pathways because it's kind of like a superphobia.
Yeah.
Phobias are are really good for you, right? It's a one-shot powerful learning event that keeps you away from the danger of the thing that caused the first one to happen. So we get close to that thing again, and we have this huge emotional resistance and a reluctance, and we push it away. We push away danger. So there's survival value in that. And so post-traumatic stress is just sort of like that on steroids. But we come into this world with four hardwired fears: loud noises, sudden approach, falling, and smothering. A baby, knowing nothing about the planet, will respond to those four things. There'll be a limbic system response to those four things. So everything else that we're scared of, or that we have a phobia of, or that we have post-traumatic stress around, happened, We told ourselves stories about it. We had feelings about the stories we told ourselves, and then it creates this superphobia. And then it just hijacks the brain. At that point, because of the supermyelination that occurs, or the over creation of nervous fiber bundles in the sympathetic nervous system, because of that, then it becomes a pathology. But now we've learned through the dual sympathetic reset or transcranial magnetic stimulation or some of the other interventions, along with some of the talk therapies, we can actually begin to unwind those things. My big concern as a trainer
Mm-hmm.
is that we don't create what I call pre-TSD,
Mm.
which means we're setting people up by having them feel bad in training about the events that are occurring, such that we're actually creating phobic moments within the training event
Ooh.
that when they see it on the street, they have that reaction and it just reinforces their failure mechanisms and it causes them to be risk aversive rather than prosecute the risk aversion, the risk seeking profession that they signed up for.
Can you give an example in training? Is there
Sure, absolutely. There's this one TV show about Flint, Michigan, and I think it was called Flint Town, and it shows a lot of the problems that they have in this city near Detroit called Flint, Michigan. And on one of the episodes, they had these kids going through a police academy, and they're going through a scenario. I've got these two kids going through this abandoned school, and they're searching. The camera zooms in on them, and you can see the fear in their face. And then one of the kids gets shot, and he takes a knee and he goes down. And then the guy that shot him comes up and puts a gun to his head, and then the trainer blows the whistle and they stops the scenario. And the trainer, who is a kind person, he just doesn't know what he's doing, right? As far as a trainer goes, and there's a lot of that going on. What he does is he starts to narrate what he saw the kid do. You got shot? Yeah, I got shot. And you just gave up? Yeah, I shot. I was dead. When you get shot, you don't die. Oh, I thought that like it was paintball. No, I said it wasn't like paintball. So now he's having this humiliation moment.
Mm.
And then as it goes on, they don't do any debrief. They don't do any remediation. There's no do-over. He just goes back with his other classmates, and they just sitting there making fun of him as he's sitting there with his head down, ruminating and going over this over and over and over again. So what he's creating inside his mind is a humiliation pathway. And when you study the psychobiology or the neurobiology of humiliation, it's an extremely powerful progenitor for creating risk aversiveness, and it will have very, very long lasting effects, such that kids who got shamed by their priest in school, are now live shameful lives because it's just such a powerful agent for change. And so in a lot of scenarios that go on out there, people are being humiliated. I've seen SWAT guys standing at the top of a rappel tower with their knees just shuddering, standing at the edge, and their knees are just shaking like that, terrified to take that step over the edge. You can't fall. If you got somebody at the bottom of the rope on belay and you fall, the guy on belay just pulls the rope and it arrests your fall. You can't fall. And yet these men who are supposed to be these hard charge, courageous men are terrified of being up on the tower. Now, I can get them beyond that terror because here's one of my little mini lectures. At the precipice of uncertainty, fear is a normal physiological reaction for danger. We're horrible at understanding what fear is. The North American Inuit have 37 words for snow, and we have one word for fear, right? And it gets a really, really bad reputation. Fear is a mobilizing emotion, not a paralyzing emotion. It mobilizes all of your stuff. You start to get that feeling, that little adrenaline hit up the back of your spine. At that moment, the unconscious mind will ask a single question. Do I have the tools and talent to solve this, or do I not? If the answer is yes, you go to exhilaration. And at that point, time slows down, all of these options open up to you, and you can literally respond to the situation. If the answer is no, I don't have the tools or talent, then you go to anxiety. I talk about it in terms of in one of my upcoming books, The Art of Pretending. I talk about Lionheart and Scaredy Cat. So you got this little feline sitting in your head, and it just kind of wants to curl up by the fireplace. And then something gets its attention, and it goes meow, and it just starts to look around. And if it has all of the tools and talent to solve it, then it's the we meter versus the wham meter. You go wee. It's if it because it's fun. If it's
Mm-hmm.
if you go wham, right? So scaredy cat's either going to start to howl or turn into Lionheart and just go, I've got this one, right? But at this precipice of uncertainty, that is the teachable moment. And what you'll find out in well-structured scenario-based training, well-written, well-structured, well-acted, with ideas of what it is that you're testing. Don't test something they've never learned how to do. That's
Mm-hmm.
just not fair. That's not experiential training, that's experimental
Yeah.
training. And so now they're at that precipice of uncertainty. And in many instances, you'll see them start to touch themselves. Their legs will move around a little bit, forward, backward. I call it the pee-pee dance. What they're doing is they are manifesting uncertainty. You can see it being acted out. It's almost like there's a bunch of question marks swirling around in their head. That is not the time for a role player to jump up from behind his little boo box and start attacking someone who is not responding to the situation. Pressure is good. We need to continue to exert the right amount of pressure. But if you've got someone who doesn't even have their pistol out when someone is coming at them with a knife saying, I'm going to stab you with this big shiny knife, and they're not responding, there's no value in plunging the knife
No.
into them.
What
None.
should we do then at
Press
that
the pause
moment?
button. Press the pause button.
Yeah.
There's Training the Speed of Life Volume 2 will be out this year, by the way.
Oh, and you talk
Yeah,
about train volume 2, and you talk about the art of pretending. So 2 books coming out.
3 books actually: Seven Survivals, The Art of Pretending, and Training the Speed of Life 2.
Wow.
So busy year. Um,
Okay.
so I won't go too far down those pathways, but with with something that was taught. I was over in Australia and I was working with the Second Commando Regiment. Great guys. And there's a guy over there, Chief Warrant Dan Tolley, really good guy, big, meaty commando guy. And one of the commanders asked me while I was over there, what exactly do you do? Explain your process to me. I said, well, it's kind of like, and Dan said, I got this. And he pulls out a sheet of paper, and I'll send it to you after the show. You can put it in the course notes. And he draws this XY axis on there, and he whacks the x-axis, or is that the y-axis? I'll call it the bottom line. The
Hmm.
x-axis. So the bottom line he labels as time. And it doesn't matter how much time. It can be 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 years. But this is time. And then up here, you've got capacity, your ability to do anything. And then he draws about a 30-degree straight line from the beginning to the end of this thing, and it ends at 80% capacity. So your ability to do things is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, up to 100. And the line goes up all the way to about between 80 and 90, 80 and 90%, somewhere in there. That's what they're looking to graduate, someone that's 80 to 90% talented. And when I asked him why 80 to 90%, he said because that's where every good team is on their best day.
Hmm.
They'll have about 80 to 90% of things that went exceptionally well, and about 10 to 15% of things that they really didn't do well. And if they had a do-over, they'd redo those things, and one of those things might have got them killed,
Yeah.
right? So they get a little bit of luck out of that bag, put some experience into it. Well, that's where the nines and the ones live.
Yeah.
They live on that line. The 80s and the 10s live on this line, like
Hmm.
that. And so all the way up to graduation, you've got this capacity gap.
Yeah.
And then the timeline, more than 50% of the time is spent on crawl. Then you got about 25% spent on walk, then about 15% spent on run, then about 10% spent on assess. So there's always going to be an uncoached assessment phase, but that's where most of the consolidation occurs with all of the things that they've learned on these things. Everybody sits on different parts of this
Yeah.
line along this tempo line where they're trying to get to the end of the program.
Yeah.
And so some guys going to be really good at physical skills, some guys going to be really good at mental skills, some guys going to be really good at emotional skills. Their job at the end of the course is to get to there. And if they don't get to there, they don't make it.
Yeah.
But within their organization, as long as they didn't violate an organizational attribute, they can come back and have a second bite at the apple. Now, here's the interesting thing, and the Special Arts Service Regiment utilized the same process, but now I got this Tolly curve. I said, that's brilliant. I'm going to get a graphic artist. I'm going to do it better, and I'm going to name it after you. I'm going to teach it all over the world. So way to go, Dan, if you're listening to this. So the thing about the people that came back, that they didn't make it to here, from here, didn't matter if they did this or this. If they didn't make it to here and they came back to here, the next time through the course, they didn't do this. They did that.
Ah.
And so there was something that happened between the end of the course. They were able to stick around, watch other people, make it through, think about things, ask a lot of questions. And then the consolidation piece came back, and it was just like they're getting it again this time, but they got it at a much higher level, to the point where we began to ask, should everybody go through this, not this?
Hmm.
And they said, no, we're pretty much okay where we're at with this. But then, of course, what did the organization do? They said, you're so good at this now, we're just going to start adding more people. So if you're really good getting this number of people, now we're going to give you 20 times or 20 more people, double the amount of people. And then their program started to fall off because people that make decisions like that don't understand how people are. Now it's just too much, and now the program is not as good as it was. So all to say, that process there, I utilize that Tolly curve as an overlay on every single individual for every single scenario.
Yeah.
I look at that, and if they get to the thing where I'm going to stab you with my big shiny knife and they're not pulling out a pistol, where are they on the Tolly curve? Are they at crawl, walk, run, or assess?
Yeah.
They might be like really solid people, but they've never experienced this thing before.
Yeah.
So they're back at crawl with this one. During crawl, we can do more walkthrough, talk through, more pause plays, more room and more scope to reverse the situation, to go back a couple of steps and talk things through and think things through. And what about this? And where are we here?
Yeah.
One of the processes that we utilize in our training program is called the Temple of Awesome. We're at the Temple of Awesome. If you give me the gift of your vulnerability, I will galvanize it into something that is undefeatable. But that's a huge trust piece.
Yeah.
Right? We need to be worthy of that gift of their vulnerability, because if all we do is humiliate them, make them feel stupid, everybody is going to hide, lie, and fake.
Yes.
And we're not going to see where their vulnerabilities lie. And then they're going to get out into the wild, and we're going to think, well, we trained them.
Yeah.
And it's not fair, right? And so when we start looking at the 80s, we got to spend a lot more time. Here's the interesting thing. And when you look at that crawl, walk, run, and assess, intuitively, trainers will look at that and say, we don't have time for that. These people, we shouldn't even have these people. These people need to catch up. We haven't got time to waste on each of these individuals. Well, number one, you're wrong. You have an obligation. This isn't time to waste. This is an obligation to train. You have an obligation to take the time that's necessary to get people that you're going to put in harm's way up to the right level that they can actually do so in a fashion consistent with the laws in our society, and that they're coming home emotionally and physically well.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a little bit different for all sorts of people, which
Yeah.
means we need to take a longevity approach to our training program.
Yeah.
Most people that have scenario-based training stuff in their organization have projects, not programs. Meaning, hey, what are we going to do in block training this year? And then they make a few little scenarios up and they put everybody through the same stuff. And it's like a hamster wheel. You ever seen a little hamster or a mouse running on one of those little wheels?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He's just running on that little cage and
Yeah.
he's going really, really fast, but he's not going anywhere, right? And that's what a lot of training projects are. A lot of activity with zero forward progress. But if we take a 5 to 7 year approach to where is Eric on the training program within 7 years? Well, he's a year 2 guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, last year he did scenarios 1, 2, and 3. This year he's doing scenarios 4, 5, and 6. So he'll be with his the cohort that are doing four,
Yeah.
5, and 6. The interesting thing is scenarios 4, 5, and 6 are actually quite similar to scenarios 1, 2, and 3, but now we're adding desirable difficulties, you see. Now we're making a little bit more challenging because you've already consolidated to a 100% compliance with policy and law every previous scenario that you've run. Nobody leaves a scenario until they win with a 6 o'clock news ready conclusion. Meaning, if that was a real situation and this situation was going out on television tonight on the 6 o'clock news, that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
If we
That's
don't
great.
get it to that, then he's not leaving the scenario. I don't care if we got to repeat it 4, 5, 6 times. I don't care. I will take that time. I have an obligation to take that time. We don't have time for that, Ken. I disagree.
Can you walk us through your course? Can you give an overview of the course you give? Because on LinkedIn I see people very enthusiastic about your course. I think it's in the yeah. I saw even Dan Fraser and other people
Yeah,
joining.
yeah. Dan was teaching with us, and Jeff Johnsgaard teaches
Yeah.
with us, and
What 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 is
Mike Ochsner teaches with us.
what is
Um,
if you are a police trainer, say for example in the Netherlands or in Europe, what is can you give an overview of the course? What are you teaching?
yeah, it's a taste of. I wish it was a 2 week course. It's not. It's a 1 week course, and I'll tell you in advance that I struggle with the fact that the technical material on the front end is not taught in a durable fashion. Shame on me. I'm a big proponent of durable learning, and I teach complicated information in a non-durable way. I need to find a better partner for internet stuff so that I can have a much more durable format for
Hmm.
teaching a lot of the technical stuff. But a lot of the technical stuff is still essential to know before we get into the scenario aspects of things. So there's 2 days of technical stuff and the teaching the participants how to actually write effective scenarios. Then days 3 and 4, we're running those scenarios that they've written. So if we've got 24 students, for example, I'll break that class into 2 groups of 12, and then each group of 12 is subdivided into 3 groups of 4. So each group of 4 has to write a scenario to the standards that they've learned over the first couple of days to write it, and it will be around one of 3 topics. Um, People in conflict. I call it a domestic, is people in conflict. It could be a parent-teacher interview gone wrong, or a husband and wife fighting it out at the house, or an argument over a roll of toilet paper at the local convenience store. People in conflict.
Yeah.
Another one will be something involving vehicles. It's a vehicle stop or a suspicious vehicle or a broken down motorist, something involving a car. And then the third category would be a suspicious person. So sneaky person doing sneaky person stuff. And then they have to write a scenario such that there will be 4 different directions that this thing can go.
Hmm.
And we do that something that's we've only started in the past 2 years being more deliberate about this, but we call it the collaborative learning model.
Hmm.
So we used to sequester students away while one student would go through the scenario. And that way, the next student would get the same unknowns
Yeah.
as the first student. And we started looking at that. Do they really need to have unknowns? Are we not training people to respond to these situations before we put them in a scenario? Yes. Therefore, is it actually an unknown?
Mm.
No, but the undertone to that is, yeah, but we don't get to trick them,
Mm.
right? And so if we change up the endings just a little bit
Yeah.
in law enforcement is a simple job. You can do four things. Once you get to the A in the OODA loop, you can talk, you can fight, you can shoot, or you can leave. That's it. Tung fu, kung fu, gun fu, or run fu. Those are the four things that you can do. And so if we, through role player behaviors, can get this situation going in four different directions as three other students observe their cohort buddy going through that, then they actually, through observational learning,
Yeah.
get four runs of that scenario.
Yeah.
Talk about value.
Yeah.
And so everybody is learning and leveling up to the
Yeah.
extent that you actually have to add desirable difficulties a lot faster utilizing this model. But your trainers need to know what they're doing. The scenario needs to be properly written. Your role players need to be very deliberately trained and rehearsed.
Yeah.
You have to have this temple of awesome excellence and training model. You've got to have enough time to be able to run people through these things. You have to have the gear. There's a lot of things in play, but a lot of people just think scenario-based training is simple. So, we'll just get some stuff and we'll run some scenarios and they'll kind of run themselves. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that quality of
No.
training.
No. Okay, so 2 days technical, 2 days running through the scenarios.
Yep, and a lot of debriefing. So during each iteration of the scenario, essentially we got four people that are in the role of being trainers, then four people that are showing up to be trained. They're the notional students. So essentially they are just props.
Yeah.
They're props for the trainers to practice this process on.
Yeah.
And then we've got four other people that are untasked, what we call observer/resource people. This is not their time to sit back and talk about the football match last week. They need to be leaning in, getting as much experience and information with the process in an untasked manner as possible. And so as each student goes through, we teach the facilitation model on how to dynamically and Socratically facilitate a student through that scenario. We do a walkthrough, talk through, all the way from the beginning through to the conclusion for each iteration, for each student going through. And so by doing that, all of the other students are also getting the value of this debrief
Yeah.
of each student going through. And if one of the students has to repeat the scenario, that's okay. Welcome to the Temple of Awesome. If you made a serious error, aren't you glad it happened here? And so then we get through to the end of those four iterations. Then the whole group of 24 come back together again, and myself and my other instructors debrief the entire process. Now we're looking at the process. Okay, you were the exercise controller, Eric. How did it go? What did you learn? What challenge did you have? If you're giving advice to those going after you, what advice would you give? You were the role player. How did you do? You were the safety officer. You were the video dispatch person. Okay, officer number one. How did they do? I'm not interested in how tactically good or bad you were. How did your training staff do? If you were the secret shopper in this process, how did they do? What would you change? What did they do well? What needs a little bit of adjustment when it's your turn to go? And then we go all the way through everybody in the class taking this whole thing apart. And then we rotate to the next group of scenarios. And so that takes 2 solid days all the way into the Friday morning where we'll do the debrief of the last group of scenarios on Friday. Then we'll do what I call the roundtable wrap up, which is going around the room and what's your big takeaway for the week? And then I'll do a lecture on the psychological aspects of dangerous encounters and the unintended consequences of well-intentioned training. And I'll show how anybody is breakable. We'll often use the example of Felix Baumgartner, the Austrian that jumped from outer space for Project Stratos from Red Bull, but he also quit the project. 1 year away from the jump, he walked out because he didn't trust the program and he thought the spacesuit was trying to kill him.
Mm.
And so, if you can take Fearless Felix and break him, what chance does some poor schmo that signed up to be a police officer who's now getting wrecked in training or beaten to death, as has happened a couple of times in America during the idiotic boxing drills that some agencies continue to do? The boxing is a bad idea for law enforcement. It just
Why?
is.
Why?
Number one, it's very aggressive in the street. And if you see a police officer punching the crap out of somebody in the street, they probably lost their mind. It's the least effective way to control people. You're going to break your hand. There's going to be bleeding and bloodborne pathogens. You need to be able to manipulate all of your stuff. Mike Tyson, who we would all agree is a pretty good puncher, punched a guy in the back streets of Chicago and broke his hand. There's a reason they call the collapse of those two knucklers a boxer's break. I was speaking with Jolie Glassman, I met her at an NLP conference, and she was up here in Orlando a few years back. And her husband, ex-husband now, ran South Beach Boxing, and they had 3 or 4 professional boxing gyms. And when I say professional boxing gyms, those were the places that the top fighters in the world didn't just show up for a glamour shot; they showed up to train.
Mm.
Really, really good boxing places. And I was talking to Jolie about this, and I said, Jolie, she said, well, we got a lot of police coming into our gyms too. I said, well, that's great, but I think boxing is dumb for cops. She goes, oh, I agree. I said, what? She says, oh,
Mm.
yeah, I absolutely agree. Punching people is dumb
Yeah.
unless you've got the stuff on and you're utilizing it as a sport. You can utilize it for building up fitness. It's amazing for developing physical fitness. But as far as a combative arts goes for law enforcement, we don't want our cops punching anybody for
What do
all of
you what do you think is a good martial art? What do you think is a good system for
all,
physical restraint and control?
all of the things that we've done in the mixed martial arts world,
Mm.
right? Any of there's got to be a short system, there's got to be a long system, there's got to be a ground system.
Yeah.
So any of the stuff with if you're gonna be striking people, elbows, any of the short form stuff, palm strikes is really really good.
Yeah.
Backs of hands for any of the stun stuff, all of those are really really good. Any of the grappling wrap up
Yeah.
stuff is really really important, especially for the endurance. When you start looking at the early days of Gracie making the transition over to law enforcement. One of my very close friends, Darby Darrow, who was a San Diego police SWAT guy, but he had his own Kempo karate
Mm.
studio. Actually got kicked by Mr. P. So I mean, he's got a lot of lineage going back to the early days of the Kempo systems. He then started studying at the expense of San Diego police. They sent him to Los Angeles a couple of times a week to study with the Gracies.
Ah.
And one of the first things that he noticed is that they wanted to take everything to the ground. Well, that's fine if you're fighting one on one, but a law enforcement officer needs to be fighting their way to their feet.
Yeah.
And so if you're training to take things to the ground in a crowded environment, number one, you're landing on all your stuff. And most of the things that they teach at the dojo in the ground fighting schools are not cement friendly.
True.
Right? So if the things that you're teaching aren't cement friendly, then how does this have some applicability? You should have some skills once you're down there. But grabbing people and taking them to the ground, you're
Yeah.
going to ricochet your elbows off. You're going to blow up tins of OC on your belt. Shit's going to break. So there's a lot of bad stuff that's
Yeah.
going on, and now you're exposing yourself to a few of the other friends of this guy that you're fighting with that want to stomp on your face, right? So we should
Yeah.
have skill sets in that space, but I think as far as the ecological dynamics aspects of folding those into any of the ground fighting stuff so that we're working things out. I think
Yeah.
Trevor Reagan with the train ugly concepts of let's figure out an end state, and then Tony Blauer talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
The taking apart the ballistic microfights, that he
Yeah.
was on the early leading edge of all of this stuff,
Absolutely. Yeah.
where he would deconstruct the fight, take you back to your oh shit moment, and then deconstruct the fight to figure out how to not get there. But once you're there, some of the things that you can do. So there have been a
Yeah.
lot of thought leaders in that space over the years.
Jeff Quill also does the same with knife attacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff's been around this for a very long time,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
deconstructing all of these things from let's figure out once we're
Yeah,
there, let's
exactly.
figure out how not to get there. And since we have been in many ways recruiting a lot of scaredy cat cops, or taking people who don't have the aggressive nature, but we're now pairing them up and putting them onto the streets, and we've got a lot of itty bitty police officers out there because a lot of places, Australia by way of example, and Europe in many instances, they spend a lot more time academically with law enforcement, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It would be great to have really well-educated cops, but at what cost, right? Do we want an academic that we need to teach to be aggressive, or do we want to take someone who has a bit more aggressive nature and give them some smarts, right? We need to be cautious about the type of person that we're taking out there, because sure, eventually we're going to have a lot of people standing around, and we're going to win through superiority of numbers. But when we see things like what we saw in the streets of Chicago, where there was a police officer, she was on a working, it's not a plainclothes unit, but it's more of a street crimes unit. So they're dressed in blue jeans and they got Chicago police belts on, so it's not undercover stuff. But they found themselves, some guy drove a car into a liquor store, and then he came out, he was really, really high on drugs, and they tried taking this guy to the ground and arresting him, and he was just wired out on drugs. And you had a bunch of officers on top of this guy, and no pain compliance thing was working on him. They tried tasing him, it didn't work. He had her by the hair and was smashing her head off the concrete. Nobody shot this guy. This guy is beating her head into the pavement. And from a hospital bed, she was saying that she didn't want to shoot him because she didn't want to be the next YouTube sensation over being the officer that shot an unarmed man of color. Right? And so that's the fear that is being placed in the heads of people these days, is that they are so reluctant to put a bullet in somebody that really ought to be getting shot. That's the whole thing. Talk, fight, shoot, leave. If somebody, it's like spinning that wheel at a carnival. And if it goes clack, 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 and it stops on shoot me, if they're doing something consistent with shoot them, shoot them. There is this reluctance.
I think Blauer talks about, what does he talks about? The danger of compliance? No, well, he has a phrase for it also.
Presumed compliance?
Yeah, presumed compliance is it? Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same as this. I'm sorry, no. But okay, yeah.
Yeah, and
the three fights. The fight in yourself, the fight against the opponent, and the fight against society.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'd better have those fights in advance.
Yeah.
You have to have those fights in advance of fighting the offender. Because, again, Patton, right? Patton said combat is not the place to be changing your belief systems. Right? And he's absolutely right. So we need to get this stuff worked out first. And the best place to get that worked out is in the scenario arena. Go ahead.
Now, if you go back to your course, you talked about the course, and on the last day you asked the how do you call it, the learners of their takeaways. What are some big takeaways you hear from the students?
Things like I never understood it was this complicated. I never realized what I was doing to people unintentionally. I didn't realize I was a hypnotist.
Yeah.
One of the things I've taught for years, and that was kind of brought me into the world of hypnosis, was that I didn't know how influential we are as trainers over people. And when
Yeah.
when you understand what hypnotic trance actually is, your students are in trance the whole time.
Yeah. You talked
So
about it with me. Yeah.
yeah, they're very susceptible to suggestion. And
Yeah.
so as a parent, it's the same thing. You know, when we yell at our kids and we tell them to go to their room and think about what they've done,
Yeah.
and they follow that post-hypnotic suggestion where they go to their room and think over and over and over again about what they did, which was the thing that got them sent to baby jail in the first place. How is playing over and over and over again the negative thing going to result in a positive?
Yeah.
All that's going to do is create a risk aversive behavioral set, which if we're putting people out into a risk seeking world, risk aversion, danger aversion is something we need to teach them to avoid. And so that comes down to danger awareness. When are they in danger? Will Smith in the movie After Earth has this horrible movie, but he got this one scene in there that's absolutely brilliant, where he's sitting talking to his son,
Yeah.
and he's talking about being out on a run and he shouldn't have been out there on his own. And then he encounters this alien, and the alien shoots this pincer. I guess it's almost like a grappling hook, shoots this pincer through his shoulder, and he can't get to his cutlass, and he's tumbling over the edge, and they fall 100 feet down into the water, and his blood is bubbling up through the water, mixing with the sunlight, and he thinks, wow, that's really pretty. And then he notices the pincer in his shoulder, and he says, I don't want that in there anymore.
Mm.
And he reaches and he pulls it out of his shoulder. And then he realizes these things don't have any eyes. They can't see. They kind of see through heat and movement.
Yeah.
And he realizes he can't see me. And he realizes at that moment, fear is not real. The only place fear can exist is in the future about something that may or may not have happened yet. He said,
False.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah. He
False
said,
evidence appearing real.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, he said, now danger is very real. He said, don't mistake me. Danger is very real, but fear, it's just something we made up, right? And so as we're making it up at that precipice of uncertainty, when the fear is there, what do we do with it? Do we galvanize it into something that's undefeatable? Or do we pound people down going, you lose? And there are people that have actually done that. I've had officers in my roundtable wrap up. I had one in tears, absolute tears, that had worked with a state police organization. And the officer said, I'll tell you what I took away from this week is that I will never do to one of my students what happened to me 20 years ago. Now, they're reliving it. There was some post-traumatic stress around this event that has now lasted for at least 20 years. Said, I will they got, you know, the term trunk monkey. They actually had somebody in the trunk of the car and pops out, comes around, steals their gun, shoots them with this blank, and the trainer made them lay down as all of the other students stood around chanting, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. You don't let anybody ever take your gun.
Yeah.
And so this is something that now affects them to that very day.
Yeah.
Now, how many times have they been in a real situation where the danger is over here and they went that way? Maybe they went that way, then 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 over here, but they didn't go that way, right? Because at that precipice of uncertainty, they said, do I have the tools and talent to solve this? The answer was no. And so they go to anxiety. When you have the neurochemistry of anxiety going around, you cannot make a decision. You're going to react, not respond. You can't get to your experiential Rolodex.
So we can teach them that at that moment of uncertainty.
Yes. Not only can we must.
Yeah.
It's not a can, it's not a should, it's a must.
Yeah.
When we see that uncertainty, I'm just pressing the pause button, but there again, it depends on where they're on the Natali curve. If they're during the assess phase, then I'm going to let them work it out a little bit. There might be a consequence for tactical error, but they're never going to leave as a loser. What's the worst thing that can happen, Eric? They get shot? Okay, they get shot. Now what? Now what? They need to respond. But if all of their training, even if that training was with the laser systems in the military, you get shot with a Miles laser. Again, over here, I don't know what they call it. I think Saab makes a system over here. Over here, it's the Miles system. So if you get shot with a laser beam, your vest goes beep, 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 and your gun stops working.
Yeah.
So one shot equals one kill, and you're being removed from the battlefield. How does that teach you to overcome deliberate gunfire? Eric, I'm going to have to pause for a second because apparently my computer did not get plugged in. So let me move my head away from this as I try and figure out why this computer isn't plugging in so that we don't have this fall off the cliff. I'll be back in a second.
Yeah.
And I'm back.
Great. Okay, so one of the biggest takeaways is why is it so complicated and so on. Do you have an online program? Because okay, do you
No,
think?
well, the technical aspects can be taught online, but the experiential aspects cannot.
No, of
And,
course,
uh,
yeah.
and I worked a little bit. There's a gentleman by the name of Nassar. He's got a thing called the Virtual Academy. Maybe you've spoken to him. Great guy.
Hmm.
And they have a lot of online programs. And he believed that my program could be substantially done online. And I said, well, it can't, and you don't know that because you haven't come to the program.
Yeah.
And so he invited me out to the Virtual Academy, and we ran one of my 5-day programs there. He was too busy, unfortunately, to attend, but a lot of his staff members attended while the scenarios were going on. And because small little changes,
Yes, of course, yes, I understand.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it took one scenario. This is before we were actually creating 4 different endings. It took one scenario in 4 different directions merely by the proximity of one of these domestic partners in proximity to a knife.
yeah,
Right? It took in all sorts of different ways. And so when all of those things happened,
yeah.
I turned to his staff and I said, "Is there any way you could have replicated that as what we did right there online?" And they said, "Not in a
Hmm.
million."
But are you teaching in Europe also?
If you build it, he will come.
How many people do you need?
Um, I've done it for as few as 15, but the economy of
Yeah,
scale, right? That's the whole thing. The cost of the lift to get me over to Europe
yeah,
adds to the cost, and then the price is the price, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah.
so if there
So
is an organization,
the more people, the better the price.
well, the more better, the more affordable it is per
Yeah,
person,
yeah,
because
exactly.
I'm doing the identical work regardless.
Yeah, okay,
So,
great.
you got the price is going to be the price, and then how you guys decide to whack it up in terms of of each individual person paying or the organization paying. One thing I can guarantee you is I'll give you more value than the money it costs
Yeah,
every
yeah,
single.
no, I'm sure, I'm absolutely convinced of that. Do you have any contacts here in the Netherlands, for example, besides me, but or in maybe in the UK or in Germany? Are there some
No,
people?
I had some KSK guys in Germany.
Hmm.
In fact, they brought me in a few years ago and had a program with them. They actually sent a couple of people over to Australia when I
Aha.
was teaching over there, and they got a lot of value out of that. Same thing with the Jaegers. They sent a couple of. I went over to. I'd have to dig and find out where we went in the Netherlands. I think it might have been. We flew into Amsterdam,
Hmm.
so there was something with the military that we
Okay.
did over there one time, and again they got the experience at the SAS program, and then said, "Hey, this would be really great," and they were
Yeah.
able to get it funded within their organization.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. Thank you. I'm going to look if I can find some enthusiastic people for that. Then
Yeah.
the last question I have for you, Ken, and maybe you can give your thoughts about it. It's about how do we use the experience of people like you, your generation, uh, in the training space? Because For example, here in the Netherlands, I sometimes see people when they are 60, they are moving a little bit to the sidelines, and you know, and I'm a little bit confused because I think they have so much experience.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not only using that, but yeah. But what are your thoughts about it? Because I talked with I was on a podcast called the Coptimizer podcast by from the States, and we talked about it. And he asked me what would be a great police academy, and I said, well, you first should have a table in the academy where people like you, maybe Tony Blauer, Bill Lewinsky, Terry Wollard, where there was like I saw it for me, where there was a great table with good coffee, with good stories, where people from the generation, the younger generation, could come for some advice and some, like sometimes we have three generations working. Why not? What are your thoughts about it? You're still active, of course, but
Well, that's the importance of podcasts like what you put together, Eric, because
mm,
you're capturing these stories. I know that Clint Smith, who's probably one of the best gunfight coaches I've ever encountered in my life, had this wonderful little. You can go on the Thunder Ranch website, and he's got these little 3 or 4 minute blurbs where he's got that. He's got some of his students sitting around the table, and he's just going off on the idea of what you can be doing in certain situations and how to utilize the range. And so capturing conversations like this is essential, because how
yeah,
can we have this conversation with that many people if we're not in front of that many people?
yeah,
I'm going back to ILEADA again this year and
mm,
running a program, and so I make myself available to anybody that would want to sit down and
yeah,
have conversations like that.
yeah,
I got nothing else to do except go to a class here and there, and I just love. I think Dan Fraser did that with his concept of kick-ass presentations, and there was another guy that was doing presentations under there, and he and the other guy called it coffee under the stairs
yeah,
at ILEADA, and you could just sort of sit there and bring your presentations and have some conversations about these things. Well, this year I'm teaching a block on write simple scenarios.
ah,
So I'm just going to teach people about, the whole concepts of writing simple scenarios, having them end state driven, know the thing that you should be looking for in the end, and then working through the talk, fight, shoot, leave. Anything that you do, any tool that you use, will do one of four things. It'll work, not work, kind of work, or work then be defeated, right? And so if we've got a talk, fight, shoot, and leave, if we've got domestic, suspicious person, vehicle situation, if we've got works, doesn't work, kind of works, works and overcome, you take the 4 times the 4 times the 4, and you probably got about 64 different iterations, and that's before you add the individual nature of what every person is going to bring to that scenario.
yeah,
There's a lot there,
yeah,
but who's gonna take the time to create these things? Where are you going to get the stick-to-itiveness within the organization? Most organizations don't have reality-based training programs, meaning that they don't have dedicated staff to do that, people that stick around. Law enforcement is a rotational
yeah,
job. So you go to training, and then it go a little more metal on your shirt and money in the bank. You got to go run a dog or go chase dopers or go undercover. And so there's no durability within the training space around this area of specialization. If you were to do that with medical professionals, nobody would ever get the experience that they need to be a great surgeon,
yeah,
right? And so I think that there needs to be more durability, there needs to be more intentionality, and they need to take it a lot more seriously. This is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. Easy implies a lack of difficulty. Simple implies lack of complexity. Everything we teach in the class is simple, but none of what we do is easy, because you got to learn the conversational models. You have to choose and train the right people for role players. We have 7 different levels of role player. And that doesn't mean you need 7 different people to do these things. one person might have been trained within these 7 spaces. But if all you need is a background person in the back going blah 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 as you come into a restaurant scene, they need to be trained and ensured that they don't try and take a starring role in the production,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's good.
So
Yeah,
so we need to be
yeah,
cautious that people stay in their lanes. And when it comes to anybody that's going to be emotionally engaging or playing the role of someone who's emotionally or chemically altered, that's a very specialized role because quite often people are uncomfortable with the subject matter and now they just start being comedians,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
As soon as you get the giggle into a scenario, it breaks the useful tension in a scenario. I was at there's a place in the Orlando area where they do some scenario style training, and Dave Grossman was there. He was doing some teaching, and I was there. I was doing some observing, and some of the things that we are doing was really really good, and some of the things they were playing what I call the gotcha game. So the role players were
Yeah.
making stuff up and popping out from behind things, and I disagree with that, and so I won't name them. But a lot of things that they're doing are really really good. And so one of the role players popped out, and you got a lot of other people observing this. And Dave Grossman, who's got this very deep, infectious belly laugh, just goes ho ho ho, because it sounds like Santa Claus, right? As this thing happens, and I had to pull him to the side and say, Dave, you need to be quiet. If you laugh, number one, the person who's going through the scenario may think that you're laughing at them, not at the situation, because people are very vulnerable when they're going through scenarios. And number two, any useful tension that you built up in the scenario breaks and leaks completely out when somebody goes ha ha ha.
Yeah.
And so I need to train the observers in a scenario to just shut up. Now, the counterpoint to that would be, well, Ken, out there in the real world, there's going to be lots of distractions and people need to be able to deal with distractions. Fine. That's not what we're doing here. We're trying to rivet in a behavioral set to a set of perceptual things that happen such that if this, then that, go to. I'm trying to build a behavior set.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things psychologically and emotionally that are going on around that integration of that behavioral set. And I don't need outside distractions. That's why the old adage is, well, if it ain't raining, it ain't training. Fine. You can pressure test any well-formed skill. But if we haven't formed that skill,
Yeah.
adding non-contextual pressure doesn't help.
True.
In fact, people are too busy paying attention to the wrong things, like trying to seek comfort.
What,
So
yeah.
that's why I say there's a lot to it. There's
Yeah.
a
Yeah, of
lot
course. Yeah.
they didn't know they didn't know.
What is your what are you most enthusiastic about with regard to training in the coming years?
I'm sorry, what am I most?
Yeah, enthusiastic about. What keeps you sharp? What are your yeah?
Wow.
Because yeah,
I read today when I was looking up the link on LinkedIn for this conversation. Andy Cassavant, if you're watching this, hey Andy, wrote an article that I think appeared just today, and in the article he was talking about how the trends are that nothing is going to be the same 10 years from now. And so a lot of people are trying to anticipate, where the puck is going, as the Wayne Gretzky hockey player analogy is. Well, Wayne Gretzky would always try and imagine where the puck is going, not where the puck was, so he was playing the future. And what Andy's contention is, and I like this contention, is what Jeff Bezos was talking about, is we need to focus on what's not going to change.
mm,
And Bezos speaks very deliberately about this. What's not going to change is people want their stuff inexpensive. People want their stuff in a hurry. Said in the future, people aren't going to say, you know what I want? Higher prices and slower delivery. And so he's dedicated to the things that aren't going to change and making those things better. Well, what are the things that aren't going to change in law enforcement? Bad people aren't going away. I don't see us developing the Star Trek phaser, where we shoot a light beam out and people will respond in a predictable way based on the fact that the different colored glowing light is going to make them do different things. We're not going to see a decrease in psychological casualties. We're not going to see a decrease in unrest. We're going to see this continuing polarization of people. So what are the things that aren't going to change, and how do we address that? And if we're not addressing the higher level of sifting, the better quality of selection, to make sure that we're getting people that are coming into the profession with the emotional capacity to deal with violent individuals and utilize controlled violence in the absence of the Star Trek phaser. You know, even if we have the Star Trek phaser, there's a movie called, I think it was called Demolition Man, with Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. And it's set in the future, and Wesley Snipes is a criminal, and he gets out of this cryo prison, and now he's out creating mayhem all around the street. So he's trying to find some guns on this thing, and he's swearing at the machine and getting fined 2 credits for violation of the verbal morality statute, right? Oh, here's your little ticket. And so now the police show up, 4 cars, and they've all got their little touch you on the head glow rod, and they're all dressed like Hugo Boss styled them. And he's got his little iPad. He's going, protect, serve in place, 38 seconds lapsed. And the little thing says, command maniac, lie down with hands behind his back. Simon Phoenix, lay down, behind your back. Ooh, 6 of you, such big scary uniforms. Maniac has responded with a scornful remark, right? Tell maniac lie down, add the words or else. And so they're trying to socially engineer violence out of the future, and you can't. Violence is part of human nature. The dark side of human nature will always be violent. And quite often, the social engineers aren't really against violence. They're against violence on any side but their own, right? And so the same thing with guns. Those who believe in anti-gun belief systems aren't against guns. They're against on anybody but themselves having the guns, right? And so if we're now taking people in a gunless society and making it such a reprehensible thing that nobody coming in to law enforcement is acquainted with guns, and people are so terrified when they're handling a gun, what do we do when they face someone who's very competent with a gun? We saw that in New Zealand when we had that maniac running mosque to mosque with an assault rifle, playing Dixie Doodle music. And he'd already, in his manifesto that he released, he said that if the police showed up, if the firearms unit showed up, he wasn't going to kill a police officer. He was just going to wound the police officer because ideologically he was there to kill people that he just didn't like. It was a religious thing, and he was going to go shoot all of these people until he was killed. Well, we were in Australia, and this was being live streamed. I was lecturing at the time, and the live stream came piping in, and we were just silent as we watched this guy going through with the live stream, shooting people, and then the live stream finished up. And one of the guys in the class stood and said, "This is why we need patrol rifles, and this is why we need them now." I said, "Okay, that's reactive, not responsive," right? I said, let's think that through. I don't disagree that you should have patrol rifles, but I'm a big believer in armed societies anyway. So we're not gonna win that argument here. However, let's think about that for a second. In the history of your organization, how many times ever since the beginning of your organization have you needed a long gun to solve a problem in the hands of the police? 2, ever, right? And so now, if we look at that video of this guy out murdering people, if gunfighting, if rifle fighting was a language, was he fluent? He was exceptionally fluent in the language of rifle fighting. So now we're just going to pass out the long guns to people who, number one, are not gun people, haven't really been adequately trained. So what would that mean? In the academy, we give you 2 weeks of long gun training in a compressed fashion. And then historically, you're never going to need to use these things. What are you going to do? Go qualify once a year? Fire 20 rounds at the range? So are you going to be gunfight fluent the next time in the future you're going to have to go up against a guy who's gunfight fluent? Or are you going to be shaky with a gun in your hands? Because I see a lot of shaky cops, even in America, with a gun in their hand doing this because they are not gunfight fluent, right? We got the 9s and the 1s that are gunfight fluent. The 80s and the 10s are not typically gunfight fluent. And so if we're going to be using guns in the talk, fight, shoot, and leave, if it's going to be the shoot, I want you to be fluent in gunfighting. Well, how do we get fluent in gunfighting? Gunfighting, right? We practice that, and we do it deliberately, and we do it in the Temple of Awesome. And I would like to see people getting 3 gunfights a year in simulation, right? So that you get to that survival 10 in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Gunfighting is not complicated, Eric. All of the people that make shooting guns overcomplicated, it's not. From here, I've got a door 10 feet from me. And to take something the size of a pistol and point it at that door and pull the trigger and hit something the size of me is not complicated. It's just not. What we need to do is enough of that with non-consequential technologies in unconventional environments. Get off the range. I despise the conventional firearms range. The only reason you need to go to the conventional firearms range is to build a little confidence because this thing that is in your hand makes a big noise and jumps around. But we should be proficient at gunfights before we even go to the range. So that now all we're working on is managing report and recoil. Just that. We've already got all of the gunfight behaviors. There is no such thing as a conventional shooting position in a gunfight, ever. And what do? We line people up shoulder to shoulder, at a distance, firing to a cadence, still, to this day, shooting for score when rather than shooting for effect. If we shoot somebody with a bullet, we hit anybody out there with a bullet, there's only one of 3 things they will be. They will be dead, they will be dying, or they will be damaged. That's it. How they respond to that state of being is not up to me. It's up to them. And so we need to respond to them until they're no longer a threat that caused us to shoot them in the first place. Until then, we shoot them until they're no longer that threat, and then we stop. Where are we going to get practice doing that? Where are we going to get confidence doing that? Where are we going to get the facilitation of doing that? You know, we're getting a little bit better with some of the video simulators. But even with the video simulators, they need the same quality of debrief and remediation as what we do in live action role play. So what am I excited about? I'm excited about continuing to do this because as long as my brain still works and I can form complicated thoughts and string them together so that they end up in a more simplified fashion for people to digest them, I'm going to keep doing that. And as soon as I can't do that anymore, I'll stop. But by then, hopefully, I'll have some durable things out there like more videos and more books and more people who have had some first generation experience learning these things in a meaningful way so that when I'm not around anymore, we're not disassembling the Lego and trying to start over.
Yeah, great. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, talking about that and about your legacy, when are the books coming out? Too much pressure.
No, it's not too much pressure. It's the right amount of pressure. I have an obligation now to have 7 survivals finished, finished in notes form by the end of summer. So the end of July, end of August, 7 survivals will be done. Train at the Speed of Life Volume 2. I just keep opening rabbit holes. So I get to a certain place and then a story comes out and I follow down this hole, and so that one's going to be a little bit more complicated. Um, the Art of Pretending, I haven't decided on a format yet. It started out as a children's book written for adults, but it wasn't coming together in that way. So I'm working on a few other concepts around that one. But it is basically the 10 principles of how we pretend our way into excellence, and why pretending is important, and the importance of play. There's a book, Dr. Brown wrote a book called Play.
Hmm.
Robert Brown, Dr. Brown, let's call him Dr. Brown. I can't remember his first name, but he's actually got the Play Institute in
Okay.
California.
Yeah, I know his name. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that he studied was that a lot of our horrific mass murderers in the world were play deprived as children.
Hmm.
And so when you look at the guy that was up in the bell tower in Austin, Texas, for the Texas Tower Killer, and
Yeah.
some of the other just horrific people, when you looked at their childhood, they were play deprived. And as adults, we become play deprived. When do we get to play again? Well, when the grandkids are around, because now we
Yeah.
can act goofy again. We're not allowed to play with our own kids because we're too busy disciplining them. And so, where does play come into it? And I'll just give you a couple of hot tips here. Rule number one in the art of pretending: don't be an asshole.
Hmm.
Just, if you're gonna pretend, don't be a dick, right? And don't allow people to be a dick to you. This is just pretend, right? We can learn more in 10 repetitions of play than we can learn in 200 repetitions of serious study, because of the neural pathways that open up in
Yeah.
play. And
Play
and
is so important. Yes.
getting a do-over, what's wrong with getting a do-over?
Yeah.
That's what we do in scenario-based training. If they don't get it right, we're going to walk it through, we're going to talk it through, we're going to figure out where it broke, and what we're going to find out is if they knew the effective thing to do and just didn't do it, what was the hesitation there? Or if they didn't know what they were supposed to do because they were never taught that, ah, well, now we can have some teachable moments and put you back into that space. But guess what's happening during the collaborative learning model? If we've got 3 or 4 other students in on that, and they get the opportunity to learn in an observational way from the trauma that guy just got without being traumatized, then they level up too.
Yeah. Absolutely great point. Yes, I changed my training philosophy also on that point
Yeah.
because I was always thinking I have to surprise them. They cannot see the scenario and so on and so on. But it's stupid because it's what you're saying.
Well, it's
By the way, when I was doing my psychology education as a psychologist, I love to see the what do you call it? The teachers doing role playing with talk
hmm,
therapy because I learned so much from just observing.
yeah.
And then when it was my part, it was still new for me, even
Isn't
though
that
I
interesting?
yeah,
Good. So even though you'd seen it, and this is
yeah,
one of the things that we learned, we didn't believe it until we saw it. It it,
yeah,
it actually it happened organically because we just didn't have enough people. We had everybody was fully employed during this training day, and
yeah,
so we kind of had to have students doing other things as well, so that we almost got to the point where people were going through the scenario that they'd written, and
yeah,
we thought there's not going to be any training value to any of this. Boy, were we wrong.
yeah.
As soon as you put on the shoes of the participant,
Yeah.
everything changes.
Everything
And
changes. Yeah,
doesn't we can still adding desirable difficulties
of
doesn't mean
course.
making it unachievable. It just means we just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and you'll start to see what the stumble point is.
Yeah,
What the Temple of Awesome will teach you from that is, okay, that's okay. Here's something that you need to go work on. If we've got a person that is having a hard time getting their gun out of their holster,
yeah,
rather than humiliate them around that, we find out that they just transition to a new holster system and don't have enough repetitions on that. So it's like a slip and capture, right?
yeah,
Only it's not weapon
yeah,
confusion. They're going back to capturing the old pattern for getting the gun out of the holster and it's not working. But now they've got a threat coming at them and now they're trying to do it harder or
yeah.
faster and it's not working worse. There's no value at that point in jamming them with a
No,
blade.
true.
They've got too much weight on their bar, and we can figure that out We've seen it with reload drills, right? I've seen
Yeah.
people trying to reload their pistol with a pager. I've seen them grab a tin of OC, trying to jam a tin of OC into the bottom of their mag well, and I'm going, "What are you thinking?" And they look at their tin of OC and they go, "Ugh," and they flip the tin of OC over and try and jam it in that way. I'm going,
Yeah.
what do we think? And they go, "Ugh." That's okay. Big deep breath.
Yeah.
We're gonna get there. And in many ways, we have to save them from self-humiliation.
Yes, true.
Yeah. So when they're heading back at the end of the day, we need to pre-frame for them how they need to process this day. Because a lot of times people have a really sophisticated self-flagellation mechanism,
Yeah.
right? And so they're going to beat themselves up. Well, if they're going to spend a lot of time hallucinating about the past, then what they can do is change the hallucination. Hey, it's their hallucination, right? They're hallucinating doing it over and over and over again the wrong way because they're not really doing it over and over again. Change the hallucination. How about you practice success? Notice how that feels. Build in a coach.
Yeah.
You know,
That's a great quote to end, I think. And what did you say? What did you say? Coach for success. What was the exact quote was?
well, if you're gonna hallucinate
Yeah.
behavior, why not hallucinate success?
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. Ken, before we are going to talk 2 hours,
Wow.
yeah, I would like to thank you. Did I forget to ask you something? And we can talk a lot more, of course, but did I forget to ask you something? What is important for you at this moment?
Did I forget to tell you something? There's that's what I love about these things is that it's all we're doing is wrapping the and end around this one chapter, knowing that we
Yes,
can open another chapter. So if
yes,
something comes to
that's
mind,
great.
or I invite your listeners, if they've got questions,
Oh
send
yeah,
send the questions into you, and we can compile some questions that they'd like to have answered.
great. That's okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Ken, I will say goodbye to you here for the listeners, and then when I pause the record button, I say goodbye to you again. So please stay.
Hey, folks, thanks so much. I appreciate the time we spent together.
Yes, thank you so much, and till next time. Bye bye.